This whole system is against us. It's
Yeah.
literally set up against the people, who are in large part unsecured general creditors of their own money and their own securities. And so what gold and silver are to me, aside from being wealth in times of uncertainty, aside from the fact that the biggest money in the world is accumulating it, aside from the fact that it's the only other tier one reserve asset in the world, it is not simultaneously someone else's liability when you hold it in your own possession, where you can be your own bank, your own insurance company.
Today, we're fortunate to be joined by Andy Schectman. He's a respected voice in the precious metals community, CEO of Miles Franklin. We're going to talk about recent exaggerated movement in the metals prices and some big picture things that are going on in the world right now that can affect the metals. Andy, welcome to Ron's Basement.
Good to be in the basement again, Ron. Happy holidays to you and everyone else out there. Good to be back. I've been watching you from afar, and I'm a fan, and it's always nice to be back in the basement. So thanks for having me.
Wow, that's a great honor to be hearing that from you. And I know it's you and I talking, but we have a third person, right, who's joining us, our viewer, and they all think very highly of you and are always interested to hear what you have to say about what's going on in the world. And there's a lot going on in the world. Yeah. And even, if we focus in on the gold and silver price, the last 5 days have been, let's say, a little exaggerated in terms of price moves. Any general thoughts on what you're seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly to the downside, we've seen exaggeration. Now, you could argue that to the upside that we saw on Sunday is that breakout that us gold bulls have been expecting for a very long time. And what we saw Monday is the other shoe dropping, what we've been conditioned to understand for a very long time. And that to me is just emblematic of how big of a deal this really is. It's a very high stakes game. And it's one where you could argue, at least I could, that this is a game of world. Oh, hello, Minnie. This is a game of world reserve status. I got my dog with me. My computer, where I'm normally sitting back there, the other day literally shut off in the middle of about 4 hours worth of work that I had been doing. And just got a box delivered to me today with a new computer. So I kind of had to pivot. I'm on the couch here in front. But anyways, yeah, the exaggeration is emblematic of how big of a deal this is. This is a high stakes game where the West is being challenged for hegemony, and I think they're going to not go down without a fight for sure. But you can see when you see what we saw Sunday night, the type of action that all of us expect to see before this is all said and done. And yeah, it's been volatile. Typically, when you see markets that blow off or really take off, you see greater volatility leading up to that moment. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now. But I think there's a reason we saw things take off. And I'd like to chat about that, if you don't mind. And we can talk about anything else. But, I've been talking for a very long time about the BRICS. I think that's kind of what kind of put me on the map in terms of all of the videos I've done, almost 1,400 of them over 4 years that talk about de-dollarization, that talk about the Belt Road Initiative, that talk about gold's Tier 1 revision, ultimately leading to the BRICS and Saudi Arabia really being the linchpin of the dollar hegemony. And I've focused a lot on that, maybe even ad nauseum. And I think, Ron, because, there are certain things that really matter to me. That's the primary trend, as Richard Russell used to call it, the way the river flows. Now, as you're flowing down the river, you see things on the shore and sticks sticking out of the water. You can call that periphery. You can call that noise. To me, it's the direction of the primary trend that really, really matters. The identification of the primary trend is, I think, the key. And to me, anyway, the primary trend is of global de-dollarization, is of a coalescence of what amounts to the majority of human population. When you talk about the Belt Road Initiative in and of itself, close to 75% of human population. And then you throw into it the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the Eurasian Economic Union and all of these people that are coalescing, finding strength in numbers against the Western coercion, the Western hegemony, the perception of hypocrisy. Why do I say that? We invaded Iraq 20 years ago, 2003. We toppled their regime. They would tell you it was done illegally as we went there in search of weapons of mass destruction. And sorry, we didn't find any of you guys, but we're still here 20 years later. We're sanctioning 14 of your banks because, well, you tried to trade with Iran to buy liquid natural gas. I understand it's 140 degrees where you are and you want to cool your homes, but you can't trade with Iran rather. So we need to sanction those banks. And by the way, all the oil revenue that you make, we're going to hold at the New York Federal Reserve. And I know you made $90 billion last year in oil revenue. And I know you asked us for $1 billion a month ago, but our answer is no, you can't have it. So what did Iraq do? They made trading in dollars illegal. If you own a business and you trade in dollars, you can go to prison and lose your business. And as of January 1st of this coming 2024, there will be no green dollar bills in any of the bank branches anywhere throughout Iraq. And this is supposedly after we did them a favor by toppling their authoritarian regime and installing a democratic regime. And here we are 20 years later, still occupying them, telling them what they can and can't do with their money, sanctioning their banks. And you can see it's this type of hypocrisy and coercion that the West is famous for, that the rest of the world is standing up against. And I think that's kind of the theme of what I've talked about for a long time. And so I focused on Saudi Arabia being the linchpin of the dollar hegemony. And over the last few years, what has Saudi Arabia done? Well, they've joined the Belt Road along with every other OPEC country. They're all on the Belt Road, every one of them. They've joined the BRICS, and as of January 1, will be a full-fledged member. They've joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the largest regional financial and military organization on the planet. And then they told the folks in Davos, we're open to taking other currencies for oil. We're open to taking other currencies for oil, which leads me to this last week. Now, Saudi Arabia didn't make this provocative statement that they're going to take other currencies for oil, but there's a summit going on in the United Arab Emirates right now, the United Nations Summit on climate control and climate issues. 200 countries from around the world, all in Dubai at this summit. Now, here's where it gets interesting. It's being presided over by the chairman of the state-owned United Arab Emirates oil company. He's presiding over this summit. And the day before, they invite 200 countries to this summit as the 7th largest oil-producing country in the world, as an OPEC member, as a country that was just admitted to BRICS right alongside of Iran and Saudi Arabia, amongst a few others. The United Arab Emirates has now told the world they will no longer take dollars for oil. Now, maybe this was a coincidence. The day before, 200 countries come into Dubai for this summit, but it's probably not a coincidence. And to me, it is a massive shot across the bow. There was a presentation at this summit where the former president of Ireland was speaking about climate change, and she was interrupted by the chairman of the state-owned oil company who's presiding over this. He said, let me just make this clear. If we go green, we're going to send human population back to the Stone Age, into the caves. So my point is that sides are being chosen. And when you see the United Arab Emirates, who is traditionally a Western-friendly country, now joining the BRICS formally, and telling the world as 200 countries come into their living room, we're no longer taking dollars for oil. We're this close to the rest of OPEC and Saudi Arabia and all of the countries that have been accumulating dollars forever to buy oil for the past 50 years, really not having the need to do so. Because if they say, listen, folks, you're going green anyway, you signed an executive order to go green, we're partnering up with the rest of our brothers and sisters on the Belt Road and the BRICS and 80% of human population that's not going green. So we're going to take other currencies for oil. And when that happens, Ron, when that happens, and it's becoming increasingly clear that it probably will happen, every country on the planet that's been incentivized or really had to own dollars for the last 50 years in order to buy oil no longer has to. And what happens when they all dump dollars simultaneously and the world all of a sudden no longer needs dollars to buy oil because there's another settlement currency that OPEC takes, and all of those dollars come home and hit our shore, creating massive inflation, the byproduct of which is spiked interest rates. So I think what you saw is Asian buying of gold and the rest of the world accumulating gold and the Western response to it. Now there is the conventional wisdom that, yeah, you have a lot of people, this is a triple top, you have a lot of people who at 2000 bought gold who were finally selling. They were capitulating. And we've seen some of that. And to a degree, some of that is true. That's natural market dynamics. But I also want to believe that the rest of the world, the majority of human population, sees what is unfolding. And this is a massive shot across the bow, right along with Brazil now joining OPEC. You are seeing these countries choose sides and find strength in numbers, pushing back against the Western hegemony, the Western hypocrisy, and the Western system. And when we see OPEC make that final statement, because after all, we are going green. We did sign an executive order saying by 2050, we're 80% green. By 2030, 50%. We're moving away from the combustion engine. Why would they want to sell their oil for dollars where we've pretty much chosen inflation over austerity, and then recycle those dollars into bonds where the last 3 years really hasn't been so great for bondholders? So this is something that's getting very serious. And this volatility that we are seeing, in my mind, is less market dynamics and more East versus West, where East is accumulating and West is pushing back. And this is a game that I expect to see much more volatility and many more admissions, just like we saw from the United Arab Emirates. But heaven forbid, when it comes to all of OPEC making this decision, very, very quickly it becomes a religious experience in this country. So to me, Ron, this is the beginning of the end of the petrodollar and the beginning of some, as the Chinese curse says, very, very interesting times in this country, leading up to the 2024 election and all of the things that go along with that.
So I want to point out to our viewer the importance of this petrodollar concept, because if we go back 10 years ago, pretty much all the oil in the world was traded for dollars, and those dollars needed somewhere to go. And the United States was happy to say, oh, you can buy our treasury bonds. And that enabled us to live far beyond our means. Correct. And accumulate what's now grown to be $34 trillion in debt. And now, as we need that money, we need people to buy our bonds, excuse me, more than ever, we're being faced with a situation where the world is changing, as you pointed out, with the United Arab Emirates. And we could really be facing a horrible financial situation in this country.
But I think this is what they want. Now, people would say, why the hell would you say that? Well, let me try and explain. First of all, you're right. We're damn near at $34 trillion. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. Neanderthals stalking the plains of Europe was a trillion seconds ago. And, you know, we're accumulating debt at such a fast pace, it's ridiculous. We accumulated 500 billion in debt in the month of October. It took almost 200 years to do that the first time. Now we do it in 4 weeks. And that's an annualized rate of 6 trillion a year. And when you talk about 34 trillion, that excludes Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government and military pensions, which exceed 100+ trillion. Now, you said something very interesting, and that was about the treasuries. And that's right. That was part of the deal that we struck with the Saudis. You value oil in dollars and then recycle those dollars in treasuries. And that gives you a return that helps us, that helps you, and for that will protect you. Well, we know that Saudi Arabia signed a military agreement with Russia. We know that Saudi Arabia joined the BRICS, and the the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the largest regional military organization in the world. They're, in essence, standing behind two of the three largest nuclear arsenals on the planet. So they've got some safety there. And then the coalition of all these countries together gives that safety in numbers. But when you talk about the bonds, Saudi Arabia is at about a 7 or 8 year low in bond holdings. They're not rolling them over as they mature. They're buying gold with it, like the Chinese, who are at 17-year lows in treasury holdings and forever decade highs in gold accumulation. The central banks over the last year and a half have bought more gold than ever. In the 70-year history of central banks, roughly, they bought more gold since they've started keeping records. And so the central banks are trading their debt, their U.S. debt, for gold. And if you go back throughout history, sovereign debt as an asset is a relatively new phenomenon in the historical context. And watching what's happened to the bond market, it's no surprise that these countries are selling debt, not rolling it over, and buying gold, which the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements, reclassified as what? The only other tier one reserve asset in 2019, next to US dollars. It's the foundation of what's coming next. And there is no coincidence that the world central banks are buying gold at such a copious rate using the Western suppression to run cover for it. And this is a big deal because think about this. As the central banks, the most well-funded but well-informed traders on the planet, dump dollars and buy gold, dump treasuries and buy gold, who's buying all the treasuries? Oh yeah, it's us. It's the public chasing yield, leaving the banks, making the banks more fragile. It's the hedge funds, it's the money markets, or the money managers rather, that are trying to find yield after a decade plus of no yield. So they're buying the bonds as the rest of the world sells them. Now, it's a whole lot easier to reset the system if you're paying back yourself. But I don't know if we talked about this the last time we were on the show. We may have. But the two economic advisors that lead the United States government for economic policy, one is Jared Bernstein, whose whole thesis is loss of the world reserve standard. He has publicly advocated for years for the relinquishment of the dollar's reserve status as a privilege that we can no longer afford, that it creates trade imbalances and distortions. He's written articles that were picked up in the New York Post called Dethrone King Dollar. And when Trump slapped tariffs on China, he said, great, hopefully we lose the reserve status. This was picked up in the Washington Post. This is the lead economic advisor to the US government. So let's weaponize the dollar. Let's tell Saudi Arabia we're going green. We'll confiscate Russia's foreign reserves. We'll do the same thing to Iran, two of the BRICS members. And then we'll tell the linchpin of the dollar hegemony, hey, it's been great, guys, but we're going green, and sign an executive order to attest to that. So instead of embracing the exorbitant privilege of being the world reserve, we're doing everything we can to tell the world we don't want it anymore. And then you look at number two, and it's Lael Brainerd. She's a modern monetary theorist. She wants the banks to blow up. So the fact that the banks are record over leveraged and under capitalized is great. And the fact that everyone's leaving the regional banks and going to the money markets, which the Federal Reserve is allowing them to put the money market funds into the overnight reverse repo market, which is paying 5 1/3% with daily liquidity. If they didn't want that exodus, they would have shut that off months ago. But what's even more telling than that is the draining of the reverse repo market and all the money leaving the commercials. They're going directly to treasurydirect.gov, where you can go right to the US government and buy treasuries, short-term treasuries, paying a yield greater than the overnight reverse repo market, maybe 5.5%, 5.4% for a 1-month treasury or 90-day treasury, 6-month treasury, and take all the risk out of it, the bank risk. So what you are seeing, in my opinion, is exactly unfolding the way the two chief economic advisors in this country wanted to unfold. One says, let's lose the reserve status, and does everything he can or we can to make that happen. And the other wants to lose all of the 4,500 regional banks. I mean, she's the one who developed the central bank digital currency with MIT. She's the one who brought FedNow public here just a few months ago, which in a matter of a few months will replace checks and wires. It's instant settlement backed by the Fed. It's like Zelle and Venmo backed by the Fed, only on steroids, is what she wants. culling of the banks. But why do this, right? Why? Well, we have a 150, 160 trillion in debt, 34 trillion on the balance sheet, the rest unfunded. And it's, people say, well, how do you pay that off? If a trillion seconds was 31,688 years ago, how the hell do you pay it off? Well, you can inflate. That's what most people will say, or you can default. In fact, Ron, we're at 130% debt to GDP, almost exactly. There's never been a country in history that's come back from that. Either they default outright or they inflate 100% of the time. So we can inflate or we can default, or we can choose option number 3, and that's find a villain. And that villain is Xi Jinping and OPEC and Putin for destroying the US, for dumping the dollar as world reserve. And now you have a rallying cry. And besides almost all of the debt, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, government military pensions, the majority of the 34 trillion, and now all the bonds that we're buying, we default on ourselves. So as a modern monetary theorist that Lael Brainerd is, the one who ran with MIT the development of the new central bank digital currency that the BIS also wrote into law, says everyone needs to have one by 2025. Biden signed that executive order. Go ahead and develop it. Now you can say to people, hey, it's their fault that the whole system collapsed. And if everyone dumps dollars, everything collapses at once, because the byproduct of that hyperinflation would be interest rates that spike to the moon. Stocks, bonds, and real estate would collapse in that environment, as would the dumping dollar crush the dollar. But what about the banks? Oh yeah, they're massively over leveraged and undercapitalized. They collapse too. And most people don't even know what a bail-in is. It's written into law. That means you're an unsecured general creditor of the bank. That means you lose everything. And that's why there was such outrage when Silicon Bank and Signature Bank were bailed out. Evidently, they were too systemic, Janet Yellen said. But when everything collapses, that's the only way the people listening to your show would take the CBDC. No one wants it. Loss of privacy, government control. But if everything blows up, and it was their fault, not ours, theirs. But you know what, Ron? Sign on the dotted line. Lael Brainerd is here. Have no fear. With her central bank digital currency that has to be rolled out by 2025, according to the BIS. Take the central bank digital currency, where modern monetary theorists, after all, will make you whole. Don't worry about it. You'll get your money that was lost in the bank, the money that was lost in your 401k. Hey, it's now in your CBDC account. All you got to do is sign on the dotted line. Could this be what they're intending to do, or could it be too stupid to be stupid? I don't know. But all I can tell you is I personally feel that the people running this country may be diabolical, but they're not stupid. And they understand that there are very few options when you go this far down the road with suppression of interest rates, with flooding the world with money, and creating this much debt. And there's no way back from it. So it's inflate, it's default, or it's door number 3. Find a villain that created it all, and a rallying cry to usher in a new system. One that's backed by what? The only other tier 1 reserve asset that the central banks, not only the richest, but the most well-informed traders on the globe, are buying hand over fist, using the stupid suppression of the Western markets to run cover for it. I believe we are seeing that unfold right in front of us right now.
Yeah, it feels like we are living in a very confusing world, in a world where the kind of the Western powers have created this illusion, smoke and mirrors type situation that's very hard for anyone. And I'll compliment you, because I think you're able to describe it as well or better than anyone that I've heard. And I really mean that. And as I listen to you, or as I do my own research, right? Because I know you're like me. I encourage people, listen to a lot of different sources, develop your own thesis about this. My gut keeps going back to precious metals as a store of value. No matter what because look, I mean, math is math. And as we look at these numbers and we look at this situation and we try to discern what's going on out there, what the Fed's doing, what the government's doing, also on a bigger picture, like you talked about, what's going on in the world, I keep coming back to precious metals. And as you mentioned, it feels like the rest of the world outside of the United States is moving toward precious metals when we look at what the central banks are doing. And I want to circle back to something that you talked about earlier, because I think it's important to point out that this trend that we're seeing in the world is really happening. And I'm glad I get to throw this in, because I know you know this, but I think it didn't come into your mind. We need look no further than, I think it was just earlier this week when Vladimir Putin went to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And I don't know if you saw footage of those visits, but they greeted him like a returning hero with fighter jets, putting out smoke of the Russian flag. They had boulevards lined with the Russian flag. And I mean, there's an arrest warrant for him in the West, right? But he goes to Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and he's greeted like a hero. And I mean, what do we make of all this? I mean, it really is happening. If you're looking to buy gold, silver, or platinum, do yourself a favor and check out Pimbex, the online precious metals bullion dealer and sponsor of Ron's Basement. I was a happy customer before they offered to support the channel. You'll find they have the best prices, quality, and service. I think Pimbex is best, and you will too. And be sure to tell them that you're from Ron's Basement.
And this is the scary part of it all, is that I think 80% of the world is still trading with Russia, even though they're sanctioned. And I think the Western hypocrisy, the Western hegemony, the Western suppression, the Western sanctions has grown old to the rest of the world. And I think the rest of the world looks at things differently. And that's why I talk about Iraq. I mean, it's a perfect explanation to say, maybe the West does things the wrong way. And I say that with all due respect to a country that I love, that has done more for me than I could have ever dreamed. I'm a patriot. This country, I started from nothing. My parents sold their life insurance policy, and my dad, whose middle name is Miles, borrowed 60 grand from his best friend, whose middle name was Franklin, in 1989 to start this company in a one-room office the size of a closet. And I mean, to get to where I am 33, almost 34 years later, I pinch myself. How the hell did I do it? It's because this country afforded me these opportunities. But you can still be a patriot and look at this and say, what the hell are we doing? Why are we doing all of these things to lose the good graces of the majority of the world, certainly of most of our creditors, and unless it's being done by design? And when you talk about coming back to precious metals, look, precious metals are wealth. They're not an investment. They're money that has outlived 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, everything horrible that's ever happened in this world or ever been thrown at metals. That's what it is. But there's even a bigger reason. And to me, it is what Doug Casey coined, the phrase that he coined, that I borrow quite often. I like to give him credit for it. And that is that precious metals are 2 of the only assets, gold and silver rather, 2 of the only assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. The phrase counterparty risk is something that's going to take on a whole new level of icky before this is all said and done. I mean, read the book, The Great Taking by David Rogers Webb. Go to thegreattaking.com. It'll blow your damn mind, period. Anyone who's read it, it's a free book. It's a 100-page PDF, or go to YouTube and watch him narrate it for you himself. It will take you an hour and a half to watch it. It'll blow your mind. This whole system is designed and has case law going back to the Lehman Brothers collapse, to where even securities held in your name, you are subordinate to the custodian, because those shares are lent out to other institutions. And if those institutions go bankrupt, the custodian has priority over you, the person who owns it, free and clear. Sorry, that's the law. But people don't know that. Just like they don't know there's money market gating that was put into place during the Dodd-Frank Act. After Lehman Brothers collapsed, with all of the money markets going upside down, and they held a lot of the money market funds, it's called breaking the buck. They passed money market gating laws. If the shit hits the fan, pardon my French, and everything starts to collapse, you're stuck. You can't get out. But look at all the money that's gone into money markets. No one knows what bail-ins are. This whole system is against us. It's literally set up against the people, who are in large part unsecured general creditors of their own money and their own securities. And when you realize that nothing is held in in bearer bond or bearer form anymore. People don't hold the stock certificates. They're held by custodians who then lend them out, rehypothecate them, or lend them to be sold short, or whatever they do. If that entity they lend them to goes bust, the custodian has priority over you. Those aren't yours anymore. They have priority over you in terms of those shares. So it's a very, very scary thing. I think people need to read it. And so what gold and silver are to me, aside from being wealth in times of uncertainty, aside from the fact that the biggest money in the world is accumulating it, aside from the fact that it's the only other tier one reserve asset in the world, it is not simultaneously someone else's liability when you hold it in your own possession, where you can be your own bank, your own insurance company. And I think that's really a point that also has to be hammered home. But yeah, the rest of the world does not look at Russia, majority of it, the way that we do. And I think that there's a lot to be said for the way he was greeted.
First Mining Gold is a development company advancing two of the largest gold projects in Canada, Springpole in Ontario and Duparquet located in Quebec. Each already has 5 million ounces of gold reserves, but exploration initiatives are underway at both projects to find even more gold. First Mining is well-financed, has zero debt, and owns an interest in 4 additional Canadian gold development projects.
I heard Ray Dalio say recently, when it comes to all the debt in the world, and I've heard the number over $300 trillion. And you've mentioned how many seconds a trillion are. I think it's important for people to remember also that $1 trillion is a million times a million. That's right. 1 trillion. That's a lot, right? A million times a million. But Ray Dalio said that with this $307 trillion in debt in the world, and again, that doesn't really account for all of it, that it's like impossible for that to ever get paid back. Like everybody thinks, and that goes back to counterparty risk, right? Everybody thinks they're going to get paid back with some form of value, but in terms of real value, there's just not enough wealth or work capacity in the world to ever pay back all that money. And as we talk about silver, I have a little 3-ounce silver heart that I bought my wife for Valentine's Day that she lets me keep down here in the basement. But right, like I hold this, right? I mean, it's mine. It has, I guess you would call it intrinsic value. I'm not relying
and sentimental value, and that's a nice thing too. When you pass it on to your family, think about that.
Yeah.
If you were giving something to your daughter or your granddaughter, a silver heart. Well, Grandpa gave that to me, and it's not only intrinsic value, time tested, but it means something. He thought about me. He did it, and there are very few things that you can say that about as you pass them on to your family.
Yeah. And I'm not relying on anybody. This is not, at my bank up the street or in a brokerage account or anywhere, or it's not money that I loan to a friend of mine, even that I have this risk that I may not get paid back. Like this is real. This is real value.
Right.
I want to mention too on the BRICS real quickly. I heard something last night that I was not aware of, that now Venezuela, there's like 20 other countries. Yeah, 20 other countries that want to join BRICS or have explicitly said, 2 of which are Venezuela, which I don't want to quote this, but I did read recently that Venezuela has like an incredible amount of oil. I mean,
I believe I want to say 16 or 17. It's either 16, 17, 18, or 19. It's right in there. I've read it 100 times. I'm not sure. Yeah. It's between 16 and 19% of the known oil reserves in the world. Yes, absolutely.
Massive amounts of oil in Venezuela. And I didn't know this, Nigeria, and I think in the United States, we kind of ignore Africa, but Africa is very resource rich, and that Nigeria is wanting to join, and they have Africa's biggest population and Africa's biggest economy as well.
Right.
So, I mean, like this is real, what's going on right now.
So there are 40 countries that have either formally or informally expressed interest on top of the 11. Now, since the new administration got into Argentina, evidently they are declining the offer. And I think that is maybe temporary. But nonetheless, so what? You have the majority of human population that is signing on. And I call it logarithmic decay. I think that's a great phrase whereby it's kind of like, how did Hemingway go broke? Little by little, then all at once. Well, Venezuela in and of itself wouldn't be a threat, but it's little by, think of it as an axe swing at a tree. Chop, 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 little by little by little by little by little by little, bang, all at once. Ooh, there go my glasses. All at once. So, and then the tree falls. Well, where are we? I mean, how big of a chop was the United Arab Emirates to the tree? And that's the question. So with all of these countries signing on, there was a lot of people that were bummed out that they didn't come out with this unified settlement currency backed to gold. Now, we were backed by gold. Well, we were told by the Russian finance minister over a year ago, almost two now, that they would back it by commodities. And Jim Rickards told everyone that they would issue it in the meeting in August in Johannesburg, and they didn't. And I'm glad they didn't, because people talk about cryptocurrency adoption, right? You got to have the adoption. Well, in order to stand up to the dollar's world reserve status, or at least settlement status, right? The fact that the dollar is the primary settlement currency for commodities around the world, if you settle outside the dollar in all of these deals, and in fact, that was the promise that the BRICS countries made at the last meeting. They said, look, all you finance ministers go back to the drawing board, come back to the meeting in Russia next August, and tell us your findings, and we will talk about a common settlement currency. But in the meantime, let's all trade in local currencies. So look at all the deals that are being made. The United Arab Emirates has 15 countries that they are going to work with and trade in local currencies. Look at the deals between Brazil and China. They're selling corn and soybeans now for yuan, and China is accepting rial for things that they're trading, and they're using their local currencies, whether it be rupee or ruble or yuan or whatever it may be. They are sidestepping the dollar in settlement, little by little by little by little by little, and that affects the settlement value of the dollar, which eventually affects the reserve status of the dollar. And even our supposed allies, France and Macron, who is right there with us when we sanctioned Russia, was asked if he could be invited to the BRICS meeting. And even though they turned him down, he went to China, struck a 50-point trade arrangement with Xi Jinping, from 5G to military engagement, and did a huge deal with the United Arab Emirates and liquid natural gas, paid for it in yuan. All of these would have been settled in dollars, little by little by little. And these countries are finding safety in numbers. 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals in the world standing behind this. This is not something to be taken lightly. And most of the so-called pundits in this country will tell you that'll never happen. Who's going to trust China? Who the hell trusts us anymore? Lady Liberty holding the scales of justice blindfolded. If you put Trump on one side and Biden on the other, do you think they balance out? Do you think the world notices that? Do you think the world notices our open border and the country being filled with 10 million people illegally? Or the fact that we are divided as we've ever been? This country is famous for, with its back against the wall, being united in a common cause, right? We ain't united anymore. There's lawlessness and no respect for authority, and black, white, red, blue, vax, no vax, everyone's at each other's throats. And it's scary. This is not the country we grew up in. And so we're not in a good position. On top of that, you have record student debt, 1.6 trillion, which is the largest asset of the United States government, by the way, as pathetic as that is, on their 2022 balance sheet. Part of their 5 trillion in assets, that's 40% of it. We have record home debt. I think it's like 17 trillion in terms of consumer debt, record mortgage debt, record credit card debt. The public is 65% is paycheck to paycheck, 45% over 6 figures, paycheck to paycheck. Lowest savings ever. We are not in a good position to be united against a problem. And everyone says, well, who's going to That's where gold and blockchain technology come in. What is gold? Oh, it's the only other tier 1 asset in the world. Who's been buying it all? Oh yeah, all those central banks. And we've been told they're going to issue a common settlement currency pegged to commodities. Sure. Well, how about using blockchain technology to show the veracity and immutability of it? Makes sense. Have it audited. Do it the right way. It's their one chance to stand up to the hegemony. But you look at the way they're doing things. China goes into Saudi Arabia and brokers a peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, countries who've hated each other, Sunni and Shiite. Why? Because their enemy's enemy is their friend. They're now building embassies in each other's country, building roads and railways between Iran and Iraq. They've hated each other. Why? Because their enemy's enemy is their friend. They're doing things in a cooperative manner, going to South America, going to Africa, as you mentioned, resource rich, building roads, bridges, maritime channels, oil and gas refineries, gold and silver mines, giving them the ability to industrialize their country, to bring their country up in standard of living in a cooperative fashion. Yeah. China's going to benefit, but these countries are benefiting too without a gun to their head.
And that's what you took the words right out of my mouth. It feels like there's, outside of the US, a lot more cooperation going on. And it feels like that, unfortunately, that when our country has been involved over the last several decades, there's more confrontation going on, and that these other countries are working together to help further things. And I want to circle back to something you said as well. I consider people like you and like me real patriots, because we are willing to speak up. And I think that I don't want to sound, go back to the founding fathers, but the founding fathers of this country, I believe, are not real happy with the direction that a lot of things have gone to in the last several decades. And I think that the people that have, and I respect you because you have a lot of courage to speak up and say, hey, I love my country, and I love my country so much that I'm willing to speak up, that I don't necessarily agree with everything that's going on right now.
Yeah, I think about it. Thank you for that. I think about that. It is a little frightening. I mean, I am out there all over the place, and I try to be respectful in the way that I say it.
Yeah.
I'm not telling people to, evade taxes or do anything illegal or to use violence. It's funny. There was a poll taken by a college in Virginia, one of these smaller colleges, and it basically came back and said almost 50% of Democrats believe that violence is justified in getting their point across, and about 40-some% of Republicans say the same thing. And so you have, and this is here in this country, right? So demonstrations and whatnot. I left Minneapolis because of this. CNN tried to tell us it was peaceful demonstrations. My ass it was. They burnt down the city that I loved. I mean, literally, for blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks, you had burnt down buildings, spray painted buildings. I mean, broken glass. It was crazy. I left because of it. And I will tell you that I think that the people who aren't saying something, if they believe it, maybe they'll regret it. I don't know. I think it's my duty to do so. I try to do it politely, but I appreciate that. It is scary, and I am a patriot, and I do love this country, and the country's done a lot for me, but I think we're heading in the wrong direction. And unfortunately, I think the people at the helm understand exactly what they are doing, and either that or they're just completely naive, and that's even a scarier thought.
Yeah. It's interesting times in which we live, and I always try to communicate to my viewers, and I feel like you kind of feel the same way. It's like we're willing to pull our heads, like we don't want to be asleep. We want to see what's going on. We don't have to necessarily like what's going on, but in a lot of ways, in most ways, like we aren't responsible for what's happening out there, but we have to accept what's going on within the United States, within the world. And what we're trying to do is, develop a thesis, develop a way to protect ourselves, protect our families. And when I look at it, and it's been great hearing from you, because you really pull together what can oftentimes be a lot of very confusing factors and present them in a way that is much more clear than I think than most people can. It feels like the big trends out there, unfortunately, right? Because we love this country, but as we look at what's going on in the world, when we look at what's going on domestically here, it feels like it's inevitable that the value of the US dollar is likely to continue to be diluted, depreciated, whatever term you want to use for loss of value. And when I'll go back to when I think about what can I do, what has no counterparty risk. I always seem to default back to gold and silver, right? As I run it through the analysis in my head. And so, on behalf of all of our viewers, Andy, thank you. You exert a lot of energy, and I know it's obvious that you spend a lot of time thinking about these things and that you care, and not just care about your pocketbook or care about your business, which I know you care about both of those, but about the country and about the people. And I would even say about the viewer who joined us today on this.
100%. And I appreciate you saying that. First of all, you said something at the beginning here that we live in interesting times. That's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. So I'll just throw that out there. And as far as capitalistic endeavors, starting a business from nothing but a loan from a friend 34 years ago and wanting to do right by your fellow man, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. And really, that's what a good business is, right? And if you're old enough to remember what it was like to go into a hardware store where the owner hopped across the counter the minute you walked in, came and said, "Hey, Andy, how are you?" Knew your name, shook your hand. "What can I get for you today?" Ran a great business, made you feel important, did right by you, and ran a good business. That's what my model is, and do the right thing and have a business that your family can be proud of, that you can be proud of, but do the right thing. And there are too many people we've become so jaded that capitalistic intentions and doing the right thing have to be mutually exclusive. No, they do not. And I appreciate very much you saying that. I do try very hard to to sound the alarm bells. And I think about it all the time. Why am I doing this? We're over 9 billion in sales in 34 years. I don't need to do this. And I mean, I went to see the Police concert at the Hard Rock, Sting at the Hard Rock Cafe a few months ago, and walking through the casino, and some guy screams my name from the blackjack table. I didn't know who he was. He knew who I was. I'm out there, and it's a little freaky sometime. But I feel that it's something that I can't even explain it. I get up every morning and I get in front of a camera like this, and I feel good about it. I sleep good at night. I feel it's my patriotic duty as much as it is yours. Take that for what it is. I mean it. But I do think these are very, very interesting times. And if I had to guess, they are only going to get exponentially more interesting. There's about $115 billion that was lent out to these very, very over-leveraged banks in this emergency funding program by the Fed that is due to be paid back in March. And of course, the election. And of course, the FBI saying, Christopher Wray, I think his name is, saying that he's seeing red alarm bells flashing more than he's ever seen, that he's very worried about homegrown terror cells, 10 million people in this country illegally, many of which are on the terror watch list that they've caught. How many didn't they catch? What's going to happen? Are there going to be false flags? I don't know. But if you look at all of these things converging together, where Lindsey Graham gets on Fox and says, "To my friends in the United Arab Emirates, if you join the BRICS, you're an enemy of the United States." Really? I mean, do you see all of these things coming together? Find a villain. There they are. Those sons of bitches did this to us. So my point to you is that recency bias, normalcy bias, the status quo needs to be reevaluated from time to time, even the best laid plans. And when you talk about gold and silver, I think about it all the time. Poke a hole in your argument, Andy. What else could you buy? The only thing that I own, other than my home, and I have some mining shares, other than precious metals, are extremely short-term treasuries, 90 days or less. I don't even feel great about it, to be honest with you. I don't know where to put your money. I try so hard to think, where would I put it? And in a world of imperfect choices, to me, I keep coming back to gold and silver as well, not to become wealthy, but because they are wealth. And when you see the biggest money in the world accumulating it the way that they are, where even in silver, India imported another 60 million ounces in October on top of 304 million ounces last year. China imported 10 million ounces in October. They're continuing to drain the exchanges of all of the big quantities. they're using the suppression of price to run cover for their acquisition, to reposition. If the biggest, most well-informed money in the world is doing this, then the price means nothing. It is the greatest tool of misdirection. And so when you can remove counterparty risk in times of great uncertainty, and look at what the biggest money, and realize that it's been money and wealth for 5,000 years. It's not an investment, it's wealth. I come back to it as well. So whether you buy it from Miles Franklin, hopefully you do, or from any reputable company out there, do it. Get out of debt, pay yourself first, buy some gold and silver, and chips will fall where they may, because as you say, these are indeed, and as the Chinese curse says, these are hell of interesting times as far as I'm concerned.
Well, Andy, again, on behalf of everyone who's joined us, right? It's you and me, but we've had someone listening and joining us all along. You've been a great wealth of knowledge. And if someone does want to learn more about your company, is it milesfranklin.com? I will put a link to it in the description of the video.
It is.
And by the way, guys, Andy owns a company that sells silver and gold.
Yes, I do. And it is milesfranklin.com. We do publish a list that is far more competitive than our website, which only allows you to go up to 10 grand. And that would be info@milesfranklin.com. Just send us an email and let us know that you're looking for the updated price list and or questions on anything from precious metals IRAs to questions about anything you heard here. All of our 14 brokers are personal friends of mine that I've been friends with most of my life, many of which go back to grade school. Some of them were on Wall Street. Some of them have degrees from Wharton. Some of them have master's degrees in business administration from Temple University. Very, very distinguished careers even before they started working here. Many of them years and years and years ago. Their family. We're a big family. All the people here treat this company as if it were their own. So you can call and ask any questions with no obligation to place an order. That's what we're here for. If we do a good enough job answering your questions and gaining your trust, then hopefully we'll earn your business too. But info@milesfranklin.com for the price list or for any questions whatsoever. And then just for generic, milesfranklin.com is indeed the website. And on it, I love coming back to the basement. The world is getting crazy. I hope you'll have me back, whether it be before the end of the year. We're getting close. Probably not, but there's a lot that's going to happen in 2024. And I promise you, I would love to come back and sit in the basement with you and chat, because I think there'll be a lot to talk about as things start to accelerate here in the ninth inning, let's call it.
Yeah, it feels like 2024 is set up for a lot of excitement, and not to mention the fact that we also have this presidential election, which I don't think people are really giving enough focus on in terms of the potential, contentious nature of what could unfold in the country. So, and I just want to point out too, Andy, I do have the Jenga board on the Christmas tree. So,
piece by piece by piece by piece, logarithmic decay. What's the one piece that tips it over? That's logarithmic decay.
Yeah, could it be?
And that's what's happening here.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, I know I'm not alone when I say you're probably one of the greatest assets to the precious metals community.
Thank you for those lovely words. I appreciate it. And I try hard, and I know you do too, and that's the best any of us can do. So thank you. And thank you for what you're doing as well, and for letting me be a tiny piece of it and coming into the basement and saying a few words to you and the people watching. So it is an honor, and it's something that I enjoy doing. So hopefully we can do it again before too long.
Yep. This is what it's all about, and we definitely will do it again.
Thank you. And to you and everyone else out there, happy holidays. And I hope 2024 is filled with health and prosperity, and all the best to everyone out there. It's going to be a crazy year. Maybe time to buckle up, but look forward to riding shotgun with you, Ron, and talking about it again and watching things unfold in real time.
Sounds great. Thank you, Andy.
Thanks again for having me. You stay well, buddy.